Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta, Volume 5, Let There Be a Temple, India/Around the World, 1971 to 1975. A biography of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, by Satsvarup Das Goswami. Chapter 7, Beginning the Temple of Krishna Balaram. April 1972. Srila Prabhupada was meditating on constructing his Krishna Balaram Mandir. In April of 1972, he asked his disciple Surabi, who had drawn the plans for the Bombay Center, to execute drawings basing the design on Indian Renaissance architecture. Prabhupada liked the Govindaji temple, located near the original Govindaji temple constructed by Rupa Goswami. He liked its open courtyard surrounded by many arches and its front steps leading up to the deity darshan area. He suggested that some features of the temple be incorporated into his temple. Surabi, with the assistance of a Vrndavana architect, executed the plans and Prabhupada approved. Quote, "This will be the grandest temple in Vrindavan. Many high-class gentlemen in Delhi, who are also devotees, will relish the chance to live with us on weekends, and it will be for them just like Vaikuntha. You must construct something wonderful, otherwise it will be a discredit to you American boys. That will absolve the position of America and India, and this Vrindavan project is one of the most important of ours in ISKCON." Unquote. Although Guru Das had been careful to keep in touch with Prabhupada by mail, he had neglected certain important matters in Vrindavan, such as digging a well and getting city approval, things Prabhupada had repeatedly asked for. In the summer of 1972, Prabhupada wrote, quote, "From the beginning, I said, I simply wanted a temple built in Vrindavan just like Govindaji's temple. And there have been so many letters, but that has not been done. Never mind. Now I like the plan of Surabi's." Unquote. 2 weeks later, Prabhupada again wrote Guru Das on the same point. Quote, "I wanted a temple like Govindaji. Is it so difficult that for the last 6 months you have consulted so many engineers? Any ordinary engineer could draw up the papers and get it passed. There has been so much unnecessary correspondence." Unquote. To build a temple in Vrindavan should not be so difficult, Prabhupada thought, and he became impatient with the delays. Concerned that the devotees and architects not make the building too costly, he said that they should go ahead with the plans he had approved, even if the building were to be a little cheaper than in the original plan. He was concerned that a competent disciple oversee the work so that ISKCON didn't get cheated. As early as April of 1972, Prabhupada had asked that the deities in Vrindavan be Krishna and Balaram. Krishna may be black, Balaram of white. And the pose in the back of the Back to Godhead magazine is very nice. He asked that a sign be put out front announcing Sri Krishna Balaram Mandir. One reason Prabhupada chose Krishna and Balaram as the presiding deities was that most of the Vrindavan temples were of Radha and Krishna. ISKCON's temple would be unique in Vrindavan. Another reason was that the ISKCON land was located in Ramanreti, an area of forest and soft sands where Krishna and Balaram had enjoyed their childhood pastimes 5,000 years ago. To celebrate and worship the youthful sports of Krishna and Balaram in Ramanreti was fitting. Although thousands of years had passed since Krishna's advent in Vrindavan, the same atmosphere and many of the same sights and sounds still prevailed. Peacocks ran across the sands or sat on rooftops or in trees. The cooing and chirping of pigeons and cuckoos and the sweep of the parrot's green wings were eternal sounds and sights of the Vrindavan forest. In Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Prabhupada had described how Krishna and Balaram and their cowherd friends played in Ramanreti and similar places. Quote, "My dear friends, just see how this riverbank is extremely beautiful because of its pleasing atmosphere, and just see how the blooming lotuses are attracting bees and birds by their aroma. The humming and chirping of the bees in the forest is echoing throughout the beautiful trees in the forest. Also, here the sands are clean and soft. Therefore, this must be considered the best place for our sporting and pastimes." Unquote. According to Srimad Bhagavatam, the playing of the cowherd boys with Krishna and Balarama as friends in Vrindavan is the highest spiritual realization, far beyond the ordinary religionist's understanding of God. The supreme truth, whom some meditated upon as impersonal Brahman, others worshipped as the supreme Almighty, and still others considered an ordinary living entity, was the eternal loving friend of the cowherd boys of Vrindavan. Only after many, many lifetimes of pious activities had they become eligible to join in the loving pastimes of Krishna and Balaram in Ramanreti. In establishing a temple of Krishna and Balaram, Prabhupada wanted to offer the peaceful transcendental atmosphere of Ramanreti to all people, including visitors from abroad, commuters from Delhi, and his own disciples. Already he had received a letter from a major international travel agency requesting that he provide accommodations for tourists so that the ISKCON guest house could be included in official tours of spiritual India. People were always coming to India to tour the holy places. Unfortunately, most of the places were unauthorized or overrun by cheaters. ISKCON Center, therefore, would be very important. Prabhupada wrote, quote, "Have a European preaching center, and try to enlist all the tourists and hippies who come to Vrindavan. Give them nice prasadam and engage them in chanting, cleaning the temple, and reading our books. Give them all facility for becoming devotees." Unquote. There was another particular significance in Prabhupada's choosing Krishna and Balaram as the central object of worship in his Vrindavan temple. Lord Balaram is the first expansion from Lord Krishna, and in his incarnation of Sankarshan, he upholds all the universes. The Vaishnavas therefore worship Balaram for spiritual strength. "You can pray to Lord Balaram," Prabhupada said, "to help you in your deficiency." As the source of spiritual strength, Lord Balaram is also known as the original spiritual master. As in Prabhupada's other large ISKCON temples, there would be 3 altars, and beside Krishna and Balaram would stand the deities of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda. Lord Chaitanya is Krishna himself, and Lord Nityananda is Lord Balaram, a fact the Krishna Balaram Mandir would proclaim to the world. Lord Nityananda is especially referred to as the Kripa Avatar, the form of God most merciful to the fallen conditioned souls. Thus, the worship of Krishna and Balaram as Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda would emphasize distributing Krishna consciousness to others. Prabhupada also wanted to install deities of Radha Shyamasundar, along with their 2 attendant gopis, Lalita and Vishakha. Srila Prabhupada could not possibly stay full-time in Vrindavan, and yet, whenever he was away, progress slowed. Guru Das, the temple president, had little money and little expertise in managing finances. Prabhupada called him "Damn Cheap Babu," a name given by Indians to Westerners who think they have won a damn cheap bargain, although they are actually being cheated. Okay, Prabhupada called him "Damn Cheap Babu." Since Prabhupada did not trust his devotees' spending habits, he arranged for a complicated system whereby he would have to approve all ISKCON Vrindavan checks, even while traveling. When Guru Das wanted to spend, Tejas, the Delhi temple president, would come to Vrindavan and approve the expenses. Then a check would be made out and mailed to Srila Prabhupada for his signature. When the check returned to Delhi, Tejas would add his own signature and give the check to Guru Das. Although Prabhupada generally preferred not to burden himself with managing his temples, he insisted on supervising all spending in Vrindavan down to the last rupee. But even with such controls, Guru Das would misspend money, taking funds earmarked for construction and using them for other temple purposes, usually getting cheated by the merchants. After Prabhupada's 1972 visit during Kartik, he was away from Vrindavan for an entire year, directing things through correspondence. With the Krishna consciousness movement growing quickly on all continents, he had many places to visit. Still, his three main projects, Bombay, Vrindavan, and Mayapur, were his major subjects of correspondence and his greatest financial investments. One reason he did not come more often to Vrindavan was that Guru Das's letters had been very optimistic, promising a temple opening by Janmashtami 1973. Surabi was in charge of the construction and knew well that the work was going too slowly, yet Guru Das would write to Prabhupada painting a picture of imminent completion of the construction and opening of the mandir. Prabhupada was enlivened to hear the good news, and he held Guru Das to his promise, though with reservations. Quote, "If you can finish the work by Janmashtami next, that would be a very great credit for you, and I shall come from any part of the world just to install the deity. But now you must work very, very hard to make good your promise to me. Otherwise, I shall be very disappointed and become very, very angry upon you." Unquote. Prabhupada warned the devotees in Vrindavan that they would have to work diligently, finishing before the monsoon season arrived in June if they were actually to fulfill their promise. But anyone visiting the construction site in Vrindavan could understand that the building would never be finished in time. The temple area consisted of foundation lines and steel rods. Only 3 or 4 devotees were living there, struggling to organize laborers and to obtain funds and building materials. That summer was extremely hot, and each day the devotees were forced to spend the afternoon lying in their huts, exhausted from the heat. Prices for cement and steel had doubled, yet Prabhupada continued to respond to Guru Das's glowing reports, encouraging him to continue with determination. But Prabhupada could also read between the lines, and he cautioned Guru Das, "I simply want to see that the work is being carried on vigorously, and the money shall not be used to pay bad bills. The money should simply be used for construction." Talk of a temple opening by Janmashtami gradually disappeared, but Prabhupada did not express his disappointment. Rather, he continued to encourage and push the devotees onward, asking that at least his own room be completed so that when he visited in October of 1973, he would have a place to stay. When Prabhupada arrived, however, his quarters were far from completion, and he had to live for a week in the home of a Vrindavan friend. He did not remove Guru Das, but he tried to teach him better management and accounting. He also wrote to his India GBC secretary, Tamal Krishna Goswami, to get more funds for the Vrindavan project. Quote, "So, I have arrived here in Vrindavan, but so far the project is concerned, why the money is so irregular. Tejas reports that in the past 3 months you have sent 5,000 rupees, and since then, nothing. How will the project go on?" Unquote. Inspired by Prabhupada's presence, the devotees rallied. They held a little festival on the land, erecting a tent and decorating the foundation posts with banana trees and flowers. For several evenings, Prabhupada lectured before a crowd and about 50 local people sitting on folding chairs in between the foundation lines. Prabhupada was determined in his desire. He wanted a temple as much as ever, and the small band of disciples in Vrindavan were convinced of their mission to erect the temple. They knew they were building a temple not merely as their own local project, but as something very important for the whole world. Prabhupada set the next Janmashtami, August 1974, as the new grand opening. Sorabi had considerable architectural and construction experience, but he had never worked with such an ornate building before. He doubted, therefore, whether they could finish in a year's time. Tejas wondered whether they could raise the funds in time. Guru Das was becoming more competent, and he assured Prabhupada that they would meet their deadline. Subala had wanted to stay in Vrindavan, but only on the condition that he be relieved of management, free to chant and wander in the groves, but he had long since departed for the west. Those devotees who remained committed to Vrindavan knew that, at least for the present, the real spiritual path in Vrindavan was one of hard labor, anxiety, combating the elements, and working as pure instruments in the service of Krishna's pure devotee. In February 1974, as Prabhupada was traveling eastward from Los Angeles, he wrote Guru Das that he would like to come to Vrindavan as soon as his residential rooms were completed. And he asked when that would be. Guru Das consulted Sorabi, who said 1 month. Trying to be more positive, Guru Das invited Prabhupada to come and move into his new quarters in 3 weeks, but Srila Prabhupada telegrammed back that he would be coming in 2. At that time, Prabhupada's house had no roof or floor, and only portions of the outer walls. Sorabi began a marathon construction effort and hired 2 work crews, 1 for day and 1 for night. 2 weeks nonstop they worked, drastically cutting corners. They plastered and painted simultaneously, and as a result, the walls remained wet. A few days before Prabhupada's arrival, they put down a temporary floor, bricks covered with cow dung, covered with rugs, covered with sheets. The weather was cold, and the house had no heating. The morning Prabhupada arrived, the devotees all gathered with him as he sat happily before his desk, praising their achievement. He said if they could keep working like this, they could finish everything before Janmashtami. Almost immediately upon his arrival, Prabhupada began to manifest the symptoms of a cold, but he would not hear of moving to another place. "This is my first house," he said. "Now I am going to stay here." The large brick and stone room was simple and austere, and remained dark during most of the day, but Prabhupada considered it his Vrindavan residence. Soon local distinguished visitors began calling on him, and he received them warmly, discussing Krishna consciousness hour after hour in his room. In the evenings he would lecture there and hold a kirtan. Prabhupada had a problem to face in Vrindavan. Guru Das had informed him that Mr. S. wanted to take back 50 feet of the donated land, claiming the construction was not going quickly enough and that he had never intended to give the front portion. He was thinking of using it for shops, maybe even a petrol pump. Prabhupada was alarmed. For Mr. S. to take back the front part of the property would ruin the temple scheme and make a farce of the gift. What good was land without proper access to it? On further inquiry, Prabhupada learned that Guru Das had not yet received the actual deed. Prabhupada was greatly disturbed, yet he proceeded calmly and intently. Guru Das, he said, should immediately secure the deed from the registrar and construct a high brick wall around the property. Prabhupada's secretary wired Mr. S., who was away from Vrindavan. "Hare Krishna, Prabhupada now in Vrindavan until the 13th. Now, settle up front piece as promised." Mr. S. wired his reply. "Front part of land will be used for other purposes as decided earlier. Letter follows." Suddenly it seemed that Prabhupada had another Bombay case on his hands. Mr. S.'s action, however, confirmed Prabhupada's urgency for completing the construction. Had the land been already walled and the temple built, there would have been no question of Mr. S.'s taking the land back. Prabhupada's followers could now see clearly his reasons for pushing them. He had been vigilant, even heavy and critical, but for good reasons. Maya's opposition to Krishna consciousness was always present, so that if the devotees let up for even a moment, they could suffer great losses. The question, why hurry, why be so anxious to build a temple right away, should never have been asked. It was the question of the naive, the lazy. As long as the Krishna consciousness movement had no temple in Vrindavan, the threat would exist that there might never be a temple. Prabhupada wrote to a friend in Kolkata, quote, "This statement of K has given me much concern. He said personally to me that under dictation of Srimati Radharani, he has given the land to us in charity. We have invested already lakhs of rupees for constructing a temple, and now, if he uses the front portion for other purposes, there will be great damage to the view of the temple. Ellipses. Kindly see Mr. N.S., brother of K, and settle this up so we can go on in our progressive construction work. Kindly treat this as very urgent." Unquote. In Mr. S.'s absence from Vrindavan, Prabhupada took the opportunity to speak with Mr. S.'s brothers as well as with Mr. S.'s lawyers. What had been given in the name of Srimati Radharani, he informed them, could not be taken back. Mr. S.'s associates agreed, at least for the moment, that Mr. S. had no substantial position. Meanwhile, the laborers were working quickly to build a 12-foot-high wall around the property. It was 4 a.m. Prabhupada sat in the cold darkness, with a small desk lamp shining before him. Having risen from bed at 2 and come into his main room to dictate Srimad Bhagavatam purports, he now sat silently. He wore a wool knit hat pulled over his ears, a sweater, and a gray wool chadar around his shoulders. On the other side of the double doors sat his servant, peeking in to see what his spiritual master was doing. On Prabhupada's last visit to the United States, he had acquired a new secretary servant, Satsvarup Das Goswami. Despite the cold, Prabhupada's new assistant was happy to be in Vrindavan, and so intimately situated close to his spiritual master. Prabhupada rang his bell. The servant jumped up, opened the double doors, and entered the room. In the far corner of the large room, seated at the desk, he saw Prabhupada, looking grave and mystical, his beautifully intense eyes sparkling. As Satsvarup offered obeisances, he thought of his great fortune in being there with his spiritual master. When he sat up, he saw Prabhupada nod slightly, and he felt that Prabhupada was acknowledging his servant's good fortune. Sitting on the floor on the other side of the desk, Satsvarup faced Srila Prabhupada. In awe and reverence, he tensed, prepared to do whatever Prabhupada requested, yet fearful that the request might be something he wouldn't know how to do. "Get the Krishna book, volume 2, Prabhupada said. His servant ran and got it from the shelf, returned and again sat down. "Read the story of King Nriga," Prabhupada said. Though terse, Prabhupada's commands were complete. His servant paused, wondering if there was anything else. He opened the book, then hesitated. "Out loud?" he asked. Prabhupada nodded, and his servant began to read aloud. Soon, however, Satsvarup became puzzled as to why Prabhupada was having him do this so early in the morning when he was usually dictating Srimad Bhagavatam. As Satsvarup read aloud, Prabhupada sat motionless, giving no indication that he was pleased or even listening. In that silence, Satsvarup became very aware of his own voice reading, and he listened intently to the story. King Nriga, the story explained, gave many cows in charity to the Brahmins. One day, however, one cow wandered back and entered among King Nriga's herd, and so the king unknowingly gave it in charity to another Brahmin. But as the new owner was leading the cow away, the former owner returned to claim it. An argument ensued between the two Brahmins. Coming before King Nriga, they charged that he had taken back a cow previously given in charity, a great sin. The puzzled King Nriga very humbly offered each Brahmin 100,000 cows in exchange for this one cow. Neither accepted, however, since, according to Manu's law, a Brahmin's property can't be taken under any condition, even by the government. Consequently, both Brahmins left in anger, and as a result, King Nriga had to take his next birth as a lizard. As Prabhupada's servant read on, he suddenly got the feeling that Prabhupada had asked him to read this story to expose the cheating of his own servant. In a panic, he tried to think of how he had committed the offense of stealing from his spiritual master. He couldn't think of anything wrong until he recalled having taken a pair of socks which had been given to Prabhupada as a gift. Prabhupada was always receiving gifts wherever he went, and it was his practice, after collecting socks and scarves and so on, to give them to his disciples. Prabhupada would use only a fraction of the things given to him. So, because it was cold in Vrindavan, Satsvarup, who had no socks, had taken one inexpensive-looking pair that he was sure his spiritual master would never want to use. He had assumed that Prabhupada would not object, but now his cheating was indirectly exposed. After the story was completed, Prabhupada remained silent, as did his servant. Perhaps Prabhupada is sleeping, Satsvarup thought, though he dared not say anything or even move. They both sat motionless, Satsvarup looking down at the book and sometimes up at Prabhupada, waiting for an indication. 5 minutes passed. Finally, Prabhupada said, "Now take this chapter and type it up." His servant acknowledged the instruction and got up to leave, but still it wasn't clear why had he read the story and why type it. Prabhupada then spoke again. "Now, I want to dictate one letter." Satsvarup had a notepad with him, and he sat down and immediately began writing Prabhupada's words. The letter was to Mr. S., and Prabhupada referred to Mr. S.'s donation of the land and to his desire to take back the front 50 feet. He reminded Mr. S. that, according to the original agreement, he had given the entire land with the sanction of Srimati Radharani. How could he say that now he was taking it back? Mr. S. should please reconsider what he was proposing. In this connection, Prabhupada was enclosing the story from Srimad Bhagavatam of King Nriga. Mr. S. should read it and consider the implications. Prabhupada's servant felt relieved, but he also felt that his guilt was valid and that he should be wary of becoming too familiar with his spiritual master's possessions. And he had learned another lesson as well. His own viewpoint of Prabhupada was entirely subjective. Although he had been with Prabhupada, he had not correctly understood Prabhupada's thoughts and motives. He felt that perhaps he was not the only disciple who sometimes made that mistake. One may try to comprehend the many aspects of Srila Prabhupada, but one should not expect to understand completely. Even GBC secretaries and other leading devotees who were right with Prabhupada in his dealings could not know what Prabhupada was thinking. Satsvarup Maharaj decided that it was best to always follow Srila Prabhupada's instructions, and going back to the adjoining room, he began typing the story of King Nriga. At sunrise, Prabhupada stepped out of his house onto the dusty lane, and the devotees of ISKCON Vrindavan joined him on his morning walk. As he walked, he began saying that one of the devotees had complained that the electricity was always going off. The devotee had said that India was advanced in spiritual knowledge and the West in material knowledge, and that the two should combine. Prabhupada agreed. "Yes," he said, "that is my mission, to combine them." Prabhupada reached the Chatikada road in front of the property and began walking down the middle of the road in the direction of Delhi. Large neem trees lined the road. The material side of life is also necessary, Prabhupada continued. In the West, even for shaving, they have a machine. This is very good, but it is also being misused. It is all for the itching sensation, sex, which is insignificant and abominable. The whole intelligence is being employed like the dogs or cats. Prabhupada paused, and a devotee asked, Prabhupada, how can we understand that Vrindavan is Krishna's abode? There seems to be so much contamination in Vrindavan. This is because your senses are impure, said Prabhupada. But when your eyes are smeared with the salve of love, then you can see Vrindavan. Don't judge Vrindavan by this external manifestation. As Prabhupada walked along the road, many persons greeted him and his disciples, calling, Jai Radhe, Hare Krishna. Some even stepped out of their shoes and prostrated themselves before Prabhupada, who returned their respects with folded palms, nodding his head and saying, Hare Krishna. The tightly gathered group, walking in the cold morning air, passed fields, ashrams, and groves. They heard the singing of many varieties of birds, sparrows, parrots, cuckoos, pigeons, and peacocks. Sugarcane stood high and ready for harvest. As Prabhupada walked farther, the large neem trees gave way to small thorny acacia trees, and herds of cows and buffalo grazed in the fields. For half an hour, Prabhupada continued. Then, turning, he retraced his route. On the roadside, he passed a man dressed in the simple white cloth of a Babaji, warming himself before a fire of twigs. Prabhupada said that the Shad Goswamyashtakam by Srinivas Acharya defines the actual qualities of a person in the renounced order. The song glorifies the 6 Goswamis who gave up their posts as government ministers and became mendicants, accepting only one cloth and thinking always of Krishna and the gopis. Vrindavan is the gift of Rupa and Sanatan Goswami, Prabhupada said. They wrote many books, so poor people could take advantage and become Krishna conscious. We see many imitations of Rupa Goswami in Vrindavan today, but they should never take the dress of Rupa Goswami, especially if they cannot give up this cigarette smoking habit. It was the gift of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati that we should not jump and try to change our garb all of a sudden. We should try to hear of the absolute truth from realized souls. Prabhupada said that especially his disciples living in Vrindavan should become Goswamis. Whether grihastas or sannyasis, they should live simply and austerely and engage 24 hours in the service of Krishna. Prabhupada sat in his room talking with Gunarnava about finances. Where are the bills? Prabhupada asked. I am keeping duplicates, Prabhupada, Gunarnava explained, showing him how he had attached the bills to the vouchers. Tejas is keeping the originals in Delhi. This is just an explanation, Prabhupada replied. I am an auditor. I am not A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. Don't you understand? The auditor wants to see the bills, not just your excuses. Throughout the day, Prabhupada would call in Guru Das, Surabi, Mr. Lahadi, the engineer, even the contractor, Mr. Ali Books. Although the contractor was Mohammedan, Prabhupada requested him, please do a nice job, because this is Krishna's temple. If you work very nicely, Krishna will bless you. Prabhupada assured him that money would not be a problem. He would arrange that $10,000 a month would come from his temples in America until the construction was finished. It will be finished by Janmashtami? Prabhupada asked. Yes, Guru Das said firmly, it will be done. Mayapur, March 1974. While traveling from Kolkata to Mayapur, Prabhupada stopped as usual at the pleasant, secluded mango grove and, sitting on a straw mat, took a breakfast of fresh fruits. A group of his disciples and his sister, Bhavatarini, were also present. And Prabhupada saw that everyone received prasadam. He then returned to his car and the caravan continued to Mayapur. As Prabhupada's car approached the Mayapur Chandrodaya Mandir, he was met by a roadblock of ISKCON devotees waiting at the spot known as Sri Vasangana, over 2 miles from the ISKCON property. 400 devotees from America, England, Europe, South America, Australia, India, and other parts of the world sang Hare Krishna following Prabhupada as he rode slowly toward the Mayapur Chandrodaya Mandir. Prabhupada smiled. Looking out from the back seat of the car, he recognized many faithful disciples, all hankering for his merciful glance of recognition. The car, surrounded tightly by devotees, inched its way through the gates and up the long drive to the temple. Along the roadside and around the temple buildings, colorful marigolds and tagar were abloom, enhancing Srila Prabhupada's joyous reception. The temple room was completed. Its sparkling marble floor, freshly painted walls, and crystal chandeliers, all having been readied just a few days before. After offering obeisances before the resplendent golden forms of Radha Madhava on the altar, Prabhupada turned and walked the long temple hall to sit on his Vyasasan and address this first truly international gathering of disciples. He welcomed them to Mayapur, acknowledging that on this day Bhaktivinoda Thakur's prediction had come true. The devotees shouted triumphantly, "Jai, Jai Srila Prabhupada." Bhaktivinoda Thakur had written, quote, "Oh, for that day when the fortunate English, French, Russian, German, and American people will take up banners, mridungas, and kartals, and raise kirtan through their streets and towns. When will that day come?" Unquote. Bhaktivinoda Thakur's prophecy had come to pass. He had also predicted, "Soon a great saint will come and establish Lord Chaitanya's movement throughout the world." That great personality, empowered to create devotees of all races and backgrounds and to rally them together in Mayapur, thousands of miles from their homes, was Srila Prabhupada. And although he saw himself as an instrument of the Acharyas, his disciples saw him as the personification of Lord Chaitanya's and Lord Nityananda's mercy. As stated in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, "Yadyapi Amara Guru Chaitanyera Das, Tatapi Janiye Ami Tanhara Prakash." Although I know that my spiritual master is a servitor of Sri Chaitanya, I know him also as a plenary manifestation of the Lord. Leaving the temple room, Prabhupada went upstairs and retired to his room, satisfied that the building was now fulfilling its purpose by giving shelter to hundreds of his spiritual children. He began greeting leading disciples from various parts of the world, hearing the encouraging news of book distribution and dealing with problems. He asked that everyone take advantage of the holy Dham by maintaining kirtan in the temple room around the clock, stopping only for scheduled classes in Srimad Bhagavatam. The devotees were very happy to be together in the Dham. Those with experience in India, like Jayapataka Swami and Achyutananda Swami, led groups of devotees on parikram, pilgrimage, to local holy places. This visit to Mayapur would constitute the first half of the devotees' Indian pilgrimage. After 10 days, they were scheduled to go to Vrndavana. Almost all of the devotees assembled in Mayapur preached in areas of the world where the modes of ignorance and passion predominated. Daily, they had to mix with materialistic people, and it was inevitable that they would become worn down. This pilgrimage, therefore, was a chance for purification. Although they were not advanced in birth or in knowledge of the Sanskrit Vedas, Prabhupada had accepted them, and that was their certification as devotees. They were bona fide candidates for understanding the meaning of the Dham. They would become refreshed by bathing in the Ganges in Mayapur and the Jamuna in Vrndavana, and they would return to their respective centers throughout the world, purified and renewed for more active preaching. One song by Narottam Das Thakur described the pilgrim's eligibility to realize the Dham. Gaurangera Sangi Gane Nitya Siddhi Kare Mane Se Yaya Vrajendra Sutapasha Sri Goda Mandala Bhumi Jeba Jane Chintamani Tara Hoy Vrajabhume Vas. Quote, those whose intelligence has come to understand that the eternal associates of Vrindavan Dham are non-different from those in Navadvip can attain the service of the son of Nanda Maharaj, Krishna. Such fortunate persons perceive the holy Dham as an object of service because their transcendental eyes have been opened by the mercy of the eternal perfect associates of Navadvip Dham. Therefore, those who are enthusiastic realize the touchstone of the holy Dham of Navadvip through their transcendental eyes. Thereafter they reside in the holy Dham of Navadvip, which they know to be non-different than Vrindavan, and serve in their eternally perfected spiritual bodies. Unquote. The devotee's main reason for coming to Mayapur, however, was to associate with Srila Prabhupada. He was always traveling, and his disciples could only expect to see him briefly from time to time as he passed through their area. To see him in Mayapur and Vrindavan, where they could be with him daily on walks and in the temple, was the most ecstatic part of the festival. Prabhupada's happiness to be in Mayapur was increased many times by the large gathering of his international family. He wanted this. Mayapur was for the devotees. Prabhupada even thought that, if possible, all the devotees should stay here permanently and simply go on chanting, although he admitted that it was not practical in terms of world preaching. He derived great satisfaction from sitting in his room above the temple hall and hearing the constant rousing kirtans. Bhaktivinoda Thakur has said, he remarked, there is nothing of value in all the 14 worlds except the chanting of the holy names. At Prabhupada's request, his governing body commission members had gathered in Mayapur. Their purpose was to discuss ISKCON's preaching activities around the world and then to pass resolutions to direct that preaching. This was the first time they had met as a body in Prabhupada's presence, and he instructed them how to conduct their meeting. They should not simply talk, he said. Rather, someone should present a proposal which should then be discussed and voted on. All resolutions should be listed in the minutes. Chalk out your plans for the year, Prabhupada said, and then whatever you decide, do not change it, but carry it out. Then, next year, you can meet and discuss again. He was not in favor of prolonged meetings, but he was satisfied to see his GBC secretaries seriously confronting all items on the agenda for the sake of a growing Krishna consciousness movement. One of the main features of the Mayapur festival was the arrival of advanced copies of the recently published volume of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. The volume contained chapters 7 through 11 of the Adi Leela and included color illustrations by Prabhupada's disciples. Chapter 9 especially glorified the Sankirtan movement begun by Lord Chaitanya, and verse after verse ecstatically confirmed the authenticity of Srila Prabhupada's movement. Krishnadas Kaviraj describes Navadvip Dham as the place where Lord Chaitanya had planted the seed of the Krishna consciousness tree. In one verse he states, thus the branches of the Chaitanya tree formed a cluster of society, with great branches covering all the universe. And Srila Prabhupada had written a conclusive one-sentence purport to this verse. Our International Society for Krishna Consciousness is one of the branches of the Chaitanya tree. Prabhupada's Chaitanya Charitamrita translation and commentary was the fruit of the Chaitanya tree. It was fully authoritative and parampara, but never merely academic or technical. Its teachings stress that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's desire to widely distribute devotional service should be the desire of everyone. It left no doubt about what Prabhupada expected from the members of the Krishna consciousness movement. Quote, "The only purpose of the preachers of the Sankirtan movement must be to go on preaching without restriction. That is the way in which Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu introduced the Sankirtan movement to the world." Unquote. This volume also contained one of the most important verses of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Bharata Bhumite Haila Manu Shya Janma Jara Janma Sarthaka Kari Karapara Upakara. One who has taken his birth as a human being in the land of India should make his life successful and work for the benefit of all people. In his purport to this verse, Prabhupada explained the special piety of the Indians, who were always ready to take part in the Sankirtan festival. Unfortunately, the present leaders of India were leading the people away from God, away from distinguishing pious and sinful acts, and away from belief in a next life. The Indians had the special duty of educating the world in Vedic principles. If all Indians had taken to this path as advised by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Prabhupada wrote, India would have given a unique gift to the world, and thus India would have been glorified. Moreover, it was not only the duty of the Indians, but the duty of everyone to help the Krishna consciousness movement. One should know definitely that the best welfare activity for all of human society is to awaken man's God consciousness, or Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada stayed with his disciples in Mayapur for a full week, lecturing daily and meeting with smaller groups for many hours. On the day of Gaur Purnima, he went down to the Ganges and took the sacred water on his head, while his men dove off the high bank and swam. The next day he left for Vrndavana, where he would again meet his disciples and introduce them to the Dham. Although many of the Western devotees inexperienced in living and traveling in India were afflicted with indigestion, dysentery, and even in some cases culture shock and homesickness, they nevertheless traveled, a somewhat bedraggled group, from Mayapur to Calcutta to Delhi and finally to Vrndavana. Since the Vrindavan temple and guest house was still mostly a construction site, the devotees had to stay at the nearby Fogal ashram, while Prabhupada again took up residence in his newly constructed rooms near the site of the Krishna Balarama Mandir. The devotees would see him regularly on morning walks and during the morning Bhagavatam class, and he would also come in the evening sometimes to speak under an outdoor pavilion at Fogal ashram. Noticing that not many devotees attended his first evening meeting in his room, Prabhupada inquired and learned that many of them were out visiting Vrindavan's famous old temples and other pilgrimage sites, while others were shopping in the bazaar and still others were sleeping. "Bring them all back," Prabhupada said, annoyed. Coming to pilgrimage means to come where the sadhus are. I am here. So why is everyone going elsewhere? On hearing this, so many devotees came to Prabhupada's room that they could not all fit. Prabhupada began talking about tapasya, austerity. The tapasvis in Vrindavan go naked, he said, even in the cold. They are determined not to take birth again for material life. He described how the living entity before birth remains cramped within the womb, a condition much like being tied by the hands and feet and thrown in the ocean. Worms within the mother's body bite the skin of the embryo, and the living entity suffers. Because Maya deludes us into thinking we are happy, Prabhupada explained, we have to again enter the womb of a mother. And, Although in one lifetime we may be a wealthy human being, in the next life we may be a bug or hog or dog. So, this life is for tapasya, Prabhupada said. But we cannot execute severe penances in this age, so our penance is to try to reform poor crazy persons. One should take voluntary pains for Krishna. Krishna comes to save the fallen souls, so if you help a little, he will be pleased. Krishna comes himself and he sends his devotee, and he leaves books. And still, we are mad for sense enjoyment. Our penance, therefore, is to try to reform the fallen souls. Prabhupada's preaching uplifted his disciples, whose duty was to preach to the citizens of many lands. They had come at Prabhupada's bidding to visit Mayapur and Vrndavana, but their real work was to save the fallen souls of their native countries, and Prabhupada's preaching filled them with determination. Later, one of the devotees told Prabhupada that dealing with the devotees was sometimes more difficult than dealing with the materialists. And he mentioned a well-known problem case, a devotee named Makana Chora. That is your penance, Prabhupada said. Your penance is to work with Makana Chora. We should take anxiety. For a sane man to work with a crazy man is not pleasurable, but the service to Krishna is pleasurable. Prabhupada described how he had left his peaceful life in Vrndavana to take on so much burden and anxiety for Krishna. Just as he had taken a risk by going to America in old age, so his disciples should accept whatever difficulties were required in preaching Krishna consciousness. The work is not pleasurable, Prabhupada said, but making so many devotees is pleasurable. Although the devotees had been visiting the various temples of Vrndavana, eager to imbibe the Vrindavan spirit, the real nectar came when Prabhupada, sitting in his room, spoke about Vrindavan. Vrindavan is for Paramahamsas, he said. You cannot see Vrindavan with Vishaya or material spirit. The test is how much you have conquered over eating, sleeping, and mating. Don't think you can just come to Vrindavan and become a Goswami. One who comes to Vrindavan with a material spirit will take birth as a dog or a monkey in Vrindavan. That is his punishment. But the dogs here are also Vaishnavas. People come to Vrindavan to give up all material anxieties in family life. So one should not be afraid. He should never mind what is going to happen. There are many devotees in Vrindavan who are not disturbed by heat or cold. But another risk in Vrindavan is to meet those who talk of the gopis but are not free from smoking bidis. They are sahajyas. We have to see who is a devotee by his personal behavior. If one is seeking money and bidis and women and talking of the gopis, then what is his position? Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu never talked of the gopis publicly. The real Vrindavan is not to eat prasadam and sleep, but to follow the advice of Vrindavan Chandra, Krishna, and broadcast his message. That is his message. That is Vrindavan. Vrindavan Dham is worshipable. Don't commit an offense here. Take it as Chintamani Dham, Krishna. Narottam Das Thakur says, to see Vrindavan is not possible with Vishaya. So we should take the shelter of Gaur Nitai, become cleansed of eating, sleeping, and mating. Then you will see Vrindavan. Don't commit offenses here. There is a special influence in Vrindavan. Prabhupada said that Vrindavan's spiritual quality was such that devotional service performed here had 100 times the effect of service performed elsewhere. But an offense in Vrindavan also had 100 times the effect. Ordinary persons, therefore, were advised to visit a holy place like Vrindavan for no more than 3 days. Otherwise, they would become slack and return to their sinful activities. Better to come, Prabhupada said, become purified, and leave on the 4th day. and the worst offense to Vrindavan is to commit illicit sex here, so do not come and play hide and seek with Krishna. He sees with his eyes, the sun, and he is also in your heart. Krishna knows everything. Those who want to be devotees have to be sincere. They shouldn't play tricks because Krishna knows everything. Be sincere with Krishna and his representative. Preach the gospel of Bhagavad Gita as it is. Become a spiritual master. After his evening lecture, Prabhupada mentioned how some of the Sahajiyas had walked out during his lecture. They are so advanced, he said, that they want to hear only of the embracing and kissing of Radharani and Krishna. They take my talks as ordinary. Prabhupada explained that his process of lecturing was to speak on only one verse per lecture, but that speaking was the same as Krishna's speaking. He said that his own Guru Maharaj had lectured for 3 months on the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, and for that he had gained great respect. Prabhupada learned one day that one of his disciples had left the company of the ISKCON devotees to live among the Babajis at Radha Kund. Prabhupada became angry and sent for the boy to come immediately. When the boy arrived, Prabhupada went out to see him. Dressed in only a dhoti, Prabhupada spoke sternly to his disciple, saying that the monkeys of Vrindavan also live simply, but are interested only in eating and sex. Don't become a monkey, Prabhupada said, trembling as he spoke. Why don't you come and live with me? The boy replied, The Babajis have given me some facility to chant. You come with me, Prabhupada exclaimed. I will give you facility, but don't become a monkey. The boy surrendered before Prabhupada's compassionate concern. Prabhupada heard from his disciples living in Vrindavan that some of the local Goswamis had a complaint about him. They had read an article published in Back to Godhead and considered it insulting. The article, written by Prabhupada's disciple Hayagriva, contained a statement that Goswamis in Vrindavan who misbehaved would become hogs and monkeys in Vrindavan in their next life. Prabhupada replied that the statement was accurate. The article, he said, had not specifically referred to the present Goswamis, but to any Goswami who lived sinfully in Vrindavan. This was not merely an opinion, but was the authoritative conclusion of the original Goswamis of Vrindavan. Although Jamuna Dasi lived in Vrindavan with her husband Guru Das, Prabhupada rarely saw her. So, one day he sent for her and inquired why she was not coming to hear him and serve him. Jamuna admitted that she was afraid because Prabhupada seemed to be in a chastising mood of late. She was referring to Prabhupada's insistence and pushing to get the Vrindavan temple built. Prabhupada said that only by his pushing was the temple being built. But Jamuna again confessed her fear of Prabhupada's anger. You may be afraid of your spiritual master, Prabhupada said, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't come and see him. He then narrated the story of how Lord Balarama had once forced the river Jamuna to come before him. As he spoke, all the devotees present became aware that Prabhupada was not only telling the Leela of Lord Balarama's frightening the river Jamuna, but he was also speaking indirectly about his disciple Jamuna. Absorbed in the pastimes of Lord Balarama, Prabhupada described how the Lord, intoxicated from drinking honey, had threatened the river Jamuna, forcing her to come. But when the Jamuna did not come, Lord Balarama had cut into the earth with his plow, forcing her to flow to him. In this way, Prabhupada said, I will drag you to come and see me. Jamuna Dasi agreed to stop her foolish reluctance and come and cook for her spiritual master. Although the afternoons were warm in Vrindavan, the early mornings were chilly. Dressed in a sweater, a wool chador, and a fuzzy wool cap that buttoned under his chin, Prabhupada led his disciples on a pre-dawn walk along Tikara road. With the ISKCON leaders and sannyasis staying close to catch his words, he walked and talked in Vrindavan. His walks were so long that most of the devotees became tired, and some joked that Prabhupada was going to walk all the way back to Delhi. When the sun rose, gradually the air would begin to warm. Some of the devotees had expected that in Vrindavan, Prabhupada would talk more about the places of Krishna's pastimes and about Krishna and the gopis, and that Prabhupada himself would want to see the places of Krishna's pastimes. But Prabhupada seemed far more concerned to hear of the preaching of his disciples, or to discuss the construction of the Krishna Balarama Mandir. Often, when devotees raised the topic of Vrindavan, Prabhupada would criticize the cheating of certain Vrindavan Babajis and the corruption within Vrindavan, or he would speak of the special vision required before one could properly see Vrindavan. He said Vrindavan was wherever a pure devotee lived, and he stressed that the devotee's main business was to go out of Vrindavan and preach. As they walked along the road, the main traffic was pedestrians, workers carrying milk on bicycles, or men riding on bullock carts. Only occasionally an automobile would pass by, its horn honking. Almost every person who approached would respectfully greet Prabhupada with Jai Radhe or Hare Krishna, or they would hold up their hands or bow their heads and say Namaste. One young man driving a bicycle rickshaw approached from the opposite direction, and just before reaching Prabhupada, stopped his rickshaw, got down, stepped out of his shoes, and prostrated himself on the road. Prabhupada smiled and said, "Very good boy." Prabhupada paused. "This is Vrindavan," he said. The simple habit of the ordinary people in Vrindavan to offer respect to a saintly person was to Prabhupada an expression of Vrindavan's essence. Vrindavan was one of the few remaining places in India where even a common man would chant the name of Radharani and Krishna as he passed by on the road. To fully understand this extraordinary phenomenon was to understand Vrindavan. One devotee asked Prabhupada that if so many residents of Vrindavan were fallen souls, then what was the meaning of the statement that to be born in Vrindavan was to be liberated? It says in the Krishna book, the devotee said, that the people in Vrindavan don't need a spiritual master. Krishna is their spiritual master. Yes, Prabhupada replied, they have an excellent spiritual master, but one may have a spiritual master and not obey him. Then what is his position? So they are fallen, who do nonsense things in Vrindavan. But their fortune is also there, that they are born in Vrindavan, but they misuse that fortune. The land was very dry. Prabhupada said that Vrindavan was becoming like a desert and would become more so in the future. He said this was because of impiety. In the West, he said, I see in America, Germany, there is so much green, but not here. The devotees then questioned Prabhupada, wasn't the West more impious than Vrindavan? Yes, Prabhupada said, I came to you in the West, and you did not know anything about Krishna. You did not even know that these things were bad, meat eating and illicit sex. But when I told you to stop, you did it. But this is Krishna's land, Vrindavan, and they are doing these things here. Therefore it is even worse, and they are being punished directly by Krishna. Prabhupada's morning walks in Vrindavan were as exciting and enlightening as his formal lectures. On 2 consecutive morning walks, he outlined a comprehensive plan for starting an ISKCON Varnashram college. Bhagavad Gita explains how society should be divided into 4 orders according to a person's nature and occupation. Prabhupada said that although the members of the Krishna consciousness movement were above the social divisions, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, they should teach others by acting perfectly within these divisions. Not everyone would become a Brahmin, but everyone could attain the same perfection by doing his particular duty for the pleasure of Krishna. We will teach military art, said Prabhupada, to the amazement of his disciples. Soldiers will wear tilak and march, saying, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. They can march with military band and fight. To Prabhupada, establishing Varnashram Dharma did not seem difficult. ISKCON should begin by starting a college based on the Varnashram conception. There should be no unemployment, Prabhupada said. We will say, why are you sitting idly? Come onto the field, take this plow, take this bull, go on working. Why are you sitting idly? This is the Krishna consciousness movement. Nobody should be allowed to sit down and sleep. They must find out some employment. Either work as a Brahmin or as a Kshatriya or as a Vaishya. Why should there be unemployment? Just as this body is working, that means the leg is working, the hand, the brain, the belly. So why should there be unemployment? You stop this unemployment, you will see the whole world is peaceful. There will be no complaint. They will be happily chanting Hare Krishna, just like this field here. No one is working it. They have all gone to the cities to work in the factory. It is a condemned civilization. On a morning walk near the end of the Vrndavana festival, one of the devotees mentioned that the festival was almost over and that the devotees would be going back to their centers. Yes, said Prabhupada, and he stopped walking. Yes, that is our real business, to go and preach. As the devotees were making travel arrangements for Delhi and onward, Giriraj arrived in Vrindavan with upsetting news from Bombay. The municipality of Bombay had denied them permission to begin construction of a temple. According to Giriraj, 2 permissions were required: permission to build according to rules and regulations, and a no-objection certificate from the police commissioner. In issuing the no-objection certificate, the police must consider 2 points: whether the temple would create a traffic problem, and whether the presence of a temple would cause community or religious tensions. The municipality had been delaying their permission, saying they first required an NOC from the police. And the police had been saying that they needed the sanction of the municipality before they would consider giving the NOC. Giriraj had been pursuing this bureaucratic matter, but now a commissioner from the police had written a letter flatly refusing to give an NOC. According to the commissioner, the kirtan in the temple would produce a nuisance. The report from Giriraj deeply disturbed Srila Prabhupada. You should immediately object, he told Giriraj on his walk the next morning, that the government is completely unqualified. The pure devotees are always engaged in kirtan, and the government calls it a nuisance. He could at least be a gentleman and say that the sound should not be amplified while people are trying to take rest, but instead he has said the kirtan is simply a nuisance. Prabhupada said that there were many learned persons in Bombay, and they also would not stand for this judgment. You have to organize all the Vaishnavas, Prabhupada continued. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said, Satatam kirtayanto mam. One has to chant Krishna always. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Kirtaniyaha sada hari. And this rascal is saying bhajan is nuisance. Is it not possible to invoke an agitation against this? What right has he got to say nuisance? He could have spoken in sweet language that the bhajan may be very good for the devotees, but it creates disturbance to the others. Therefore we cannot allow. Say like that. But they cannot still stop bhajan. But his remark is that the bhajan is nuisance. Chanting Hare Krishna is the culture of India. We must make propaganda and organize kirtan parties and fight this. One of the GBC men proposed that instead of going back to the West, some of the devotees go to Bombay and hold massive protests. At first, Prabhupada approved this spirit, likening it to Lord Chaitanya's protest against the Qazi, who had stopped the Sankirtan movement in Navadvip. But on reflecting, he decided it would not be wise to fight with the government. The devotees could not hope to win such a fight, nor would the people appreciate it. Prabhupada suggested the devotees hold massive kirtan programs and preach positively to the people of Bombay, convincing them of the value of Krishna consciousness. When the people of Bombay are convinced of the importance of Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada said, they will see that the temple is built. In an urgent mood, Srila Prabhupada left Vrindavan for Bombay. His last instruction to Guru Das and the others in Vrindavan, quote, "An ideal Goswami should remain here to challenge any false Goswamis. But if you also become false, then you cannot challenge," unquote. Bombay, March 20th, 1974. Disciples and ISKCON Life members continued to discuss with Srila Prabhupada about confronting the police commissioner's refusal to grant ISKCON permission to build a temple at Hare Krishna land. Ironically, ISKCON's property was bordered on one side by a large cinema hall, and every evening, both before and after the movie, a long line of traffic would form. The honking horns and the hundreds of pedestrians coming and going created much noise and congestion. If the neighborhood and government could tolerate a cinema, then how without prejudice could they call the Krishna Kirtans a nuisance? Although addressing the specific issue of government permission, Srila Prabhupada also preached on the greater principle of how governments in Kali Yuga restrict religious life. The government policy, he said, is that religion is an opiate of the people. They think religion is just a sentiment. They want to open slaughterhouses and kill these mischief-loitering cows. Their conclusion is that religion has no value. Therefore, their decision is to not encourage these temples and this bhajan. From their point of view, it is useless. Some of Prabhupada's Bombay friends suggested he work through the Jan Sangh political party, which supported Hinduism, and thus form a strong political coalition. But Srila Prabhupada was more concerned to use this opportunity for preaching. "I suggest that we make vigorous propaganda," he said. "Hold meetings in big halls so that the public may understand, at least, that this movement is very important. Let there be advertisements that we will speak on different subject matters, and then I will come and speak. In that meeting, make a nice gentleman the president. Create public opinion so that they will come and sign, yes, here must be one temple. We will prove from Shastric evidence. As it is stated in Bhagavad Gita, Chatur bidha bhajante mang janaha sukritino arjuna. This word bhajan, from bhajante, is used with reference to the very pious men, sukritinaha. The opposite kind of man is dushkritinaha, the miscreants. So, bhajan is for the pious man, as recommended in the Bhagavad Gita. And Bhagavad Gita is held in great estimation all over the world, and yet he has accused bhajan of nuisance. How rascal and ignorant! We have to make it clear that bhajan is so important. Bhagavad Gita is meant for solution of all material problems, but the people of India are not accepting it. My disciples can also speak and say, "You please come with us. We are foreigners, but we know Krishna is not for this or that. So why are you Indians lacking? You accept your culture. We have taken to Krishna, and Krishna says that simply by kirtan one becomes free from all contamination. So why not join with us? What is the wrong there? It is stated in your Shastra, and we have adopted it, and we are feeling better. So why you are so callous? You educated youth and gentlemen." This kind of propaganda has to be made. Srila Prabhupada had abandoned the idea of direct political agitation, but he continued to speak against the police commissioner's decision and to deliberate on overcoming it. He considered the matter from all possible angles, pro and con. At one point he said that if they could not get sanction to build a temple, then they should build a hotel. I am trying to get sanction, he said. If you don't give permission, then hotel. Build a hotel in the front and a temple in the rear, suggested Tamal Krishna Goswami. Yes, Prabhupada replied, and he instructed his men further on dealing with opposition. As with the struggle to acquire the land, the present struggle also threatened to become a long legal battle. Prabhupada remained always transcendental, however, even while fighting, and he maintained his normal activities in Bombay, enjoying the mild tropical climate. Although ISKCON owned a number of tenement buildings on the Juhu land, the devotees had not been able to use a single one since all were occupied. But recently, when tenants had vacated one of the apartments, the devotees had prepared it for Prabhupada. It was a modest place, 2 small rooms with a little kitchen. But now, for the first time, Prabhupada had his own residence at Hare Krishna land. Prabhupada liked to sit on the narrow veranda outside his apartment and take his massage in the sun. Surveying the Juhu land with its many tall coconut trees, their long palm leaves rustling pleasantly in the breeze, Prabhupada said Hare Krishna land was a paradise. The devotees were happy. One day, during his massage, Prabhupada saw that the contractors, whom he had allowed to come and take coconuts for a set price, were also taking away the leaves to sell in the marketplace. Leaping to his feet, Prabhupada called from the veranda, Chaitya Guru. Soon, the devotee in charge of grounds management appeared before Prabhupada. I cannot close my eyes, Prabhupada said. No one else sees these things. You are being cheated. Every morning, several Indian gentlemen would join Prabhupada as he walked along Juhu Beach. Whenever Prabhupada would criticize so-called great political and spiritual leaders of India, exposing their poor understanding of Bhagavad Gita, these men would become disturbed. Similarly, Prabhupada's disciples became disturbed to hear these men argue with Prabhupada. One day, when Prabhupada criticized a favorite hero, a certain doctor argued back, criticizing Prabhupada's statement that the absolute truth was Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The doctor and others asserted that the absolute truth was many things, and that ultimately everything was one. The devotees could barely restrain themselves, but still Prabhupada always treated these men as his friends. Early the next morning in his room, however, Prabhupada told his disciples that these men were actually Mayavadis. We will now have a program, he said, where we will walk on the beach, but we will only chant Hare Krishna. If they want to talk, we will just chant, and we will all chant only. If they wish to, they can walk with us. Prabhupada, a devotee, said, they will be restless if we do that. Even if they don't chant, said Prabhupada, if they only hear, it will be beneficial for them. Mayavadi philosophy is very dangerous. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that whoever hears it is doomed. A devotee asked why a Mayavadi would disguise himself as a Krishna Bhakta. They do it, Prabhupada said, to get popular reception for being liberal to all. But if a woman says that she is very liberal and accepts any man, that man may seem to be a liberal. If a woman says that she is very liberal and accepts any man, that may seem to be a liberal proposal, but it is not good. We will read the Krishna book on the walk, Prabhupada said. I am walking with my disciples. If these men like, they can join in here. But if they want to ask questions, they must accept the Guru's answer without argument. Is that all right? The next morning, although the usual challengers did not join the walk, Prabhupada had Giriraj read aloud from the Krishna book. Suddenly, Prabhupada sighted the familiar group of speculators approaching from the opposite direction. But as they drew closer, they purposely turned aside so as to avoid Prabhupada. One of them came over, however, and representing the entire group, informed Prabhupada that they were not going to walk with him any more. They had met and decided that their conversations with him created too much argument and criticism. India has many saints, the man added. I am the policeman, Prabhupada said, and I have to catch the thief. After a few days, the same group rejoined Prabhupada on his walk, and the discussions continued as before. Some of Prabhupada's disciples remained disturbed, but Prabhupada was jolly, correcting his friends like an older brother, teaching them pure Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada would take a breakfast of fruits and nuts. Around 11 a.m., he would sit on the veranda in his gangsha while his servant massaged him with mustard oil. During the massage, Prabhupada would often speak with one or two of his Bombay devotees, giving them pertinent instructions. After lunch, he would rest an hour or two, and on arising, take a glass of fresh coconut water or sugarcane juice. In the evening, he would meet guests and then around 10 p.m. take rest. At 1 a.m., he would rise and sit at his desk beneath a tent-like covering of mosquito netting and dictate his translations and purports to Chaitanya Charitamrita until time for his morning walk. Several times a day, Prabhupada would call for Giriraj and other Bombay managers to confer on the latest strategy in securing permission to build the temple. When Prabhupada's Bombay friends would visit, they would often find him on the roof of the tenement, sitting on white cotton sheeting and leaning on white bolsters, preaching the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita by the hour. He would ask his visitors to help him solidly establish Krishna consciousness in Bombay. One day, during the massage, Prabhupada confided to his servant, "Most men are retired at my age. I do not want to manage any more. I just want to do some writing." Prabhupada asked if there was some place in the world he could go for 6 months, a place where he would be all alone, where no one would come to disturb him, and where he would not get any mail. Prabhupada's servant suggested Tehran. Prabhupada considered it, then suggested New Vrndavana. He spoke of Mahatma Gandhi, who could not even sleep at night because people were always after him, even though he traveled incognito. That very day, a letter came from Bhagavan in Paris, inviting Prabhupada to tour his ISKCON centers in Europe. Immediately, Prabhupada was enlivened at this invitation. He said he would go. "But earlier today," his servant said, "you wanted to go away and be alone." Prabhupada laughed. "That will not be possible for me in this lifetime. Better I keep traveling and die on the battlefield. For a warrior, it is glorious to die on the battlefield, is it not?" Traveling around the world once or twice a year had become Prabhupada's routine. In describing his own spiritual master, he had written, "Hindus are not allowed to cross the ocean, but you send your devotees overseas to preach." The injunction for Hindus not to cross the ocean was to protect them from leaving the pious land of India. Since so many Indians gave up their culture when they went abroad. When Prabhupada had been a small child, one of his uncles had suggested he one day go to London and become a lawyer, but Prabhupada's father had protested. He did not want his son to be exposed to the sinful ways of the West. Years later, Prabhupada had gone to London as a preacher to change the ways of the sinful. For this reason, the Vaishnava should travel. Just before starting his European tour, Prabhupada explained to several devotees in his room that they also should travel and preach. He said they should do so while they were young, and then, when they were old and matured in Krishna consciousness, they could go to Mayapur, retire, and simply chant Hare Krishna. Of course, for myself, Prabhupada added, I am not so mature. The devotees were silent a moment, but then one ventured, But Srila Prabhupada, if you say that you're not mature, then how can we ever think that we are old or mature enough to retire? Prabhupada smiled and said that they would have to decide for themselves. But he was not mature enough. Tamal Krishna Goswami said, Then we also will never become so mature that we can retire. April 18th. Before going to Europe, Prabhupada responded to an invitation from his devotees in South India to attend a 3-day Pandal festival in Hyderabad. No sooner did he arrive at the airport in Hyderabad, however, than a group of reporters asked him for a press conference. Prabhupada consented, and a reporter opened with a technical philosophical question, inquiring whether Prabhupada's philosophy was Advaita or Dvaita. South India was so steeped in the ancient philosophical debate between the Vaishnavas and the Shankarites that here an ordinary news reporter was concerned with comparative philosophies. Prabhupada scoffed at the question. What is the point of discussing such things, he challenged, whether one is Dvaita or Advaita? Krishna says, Anad bhavanti bhutani. Anna means grains. The people have no grains. Grains are produced from the rains and rains from sacrifice. So perform sacrifice. You have to divide the society into 4 orders. You may be Dvaita or Advaita, but you need grains. Prabhupada's secretary wrote to Bhagavan in Paris, keeping him informed of Prabhupada's location and schedule. Quote, You can contact us here until the 29th or 30th of April, after which we will be back in Bombay. Your idea for festivals sounds nice. Here they had a 3-day Pandal. Last night about 1,000 people came, sat very silently through his whole lecture, and then pressed forward to receive blessings from Srila Prabhupada. Devotees had the deities on stage and a Vyasasan and lots of prasadam for their guests. Unquote. April 25th. From Hyderabad, Srila Prabhupada flew to Tirupati. There, in mountainous Tirumala, stands the richest temple in India, where a deity of Vishnu known as Balaji resides. The temple managers respectfully welcomed Srila Prabhupada and his party, providing them with 2 cottages on the mountainside. According to the temple policy, people usually have to wait in a long line before seeing the deity, since 15,000 people enter the temple daily, and they are given only a brief darshan. Non-Hindus are usually not allowed, but Srila Prabhupada and his disciples received the special honor of a private darshan of Balaji. At the end of a long inner sanctum, its entrance guarded by 2 large figures of Jai and Vijay, the gatekeepers of Vaikuntha, the deity was enthroned. The only light in the inner sanctum came from flaming torches affixed to the walls or held by the pujaris. When approaching the deity in the hallway, many pilgrims would traditionally call out, Govinda! But as Prabhupada entered, he sang, Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami. Later, in the cottage, Prabhupada remarked that the millions of people going to see Balaji were proof that the masses are still attracted to God, despite government propaganda. Although most people may go to the Lord for alleviating material distress or for getting money, still they called out the holy name, Govinda. A devotee asked Prabhupada why the deity was called Balaji. Balaji, Prabhupada said, means child. Krishna as a cowherd boy, not in his Vaikuntha aspect. Prabhupada was pleased to stay in the cottage and take the deity's prasadam. He suggested that In New Vrndavana, they build cottages like this, and that ISKCON built temples like the Temple of Balaji, with its gold dome and extensive facility for visitors. One day, an official of the Tirupati temple, while visiting Prabhupada, mentioned that their collection was about 40 lakhs of rupees per month. Prabhupada inquired how the temple's income was being spent. When the priest indicated that most of the money went for renovation of the buildings, Prabhupada replied that temple renovation was good, but propagating the message of Krishna all over the world was better. Balaji is Krishna, Prabhupada said. His message should be spread. He descended as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to teach us. Prabhupada told the priest of how so many old churches in London were not being used. How will the spirit of the temple be maintained without preaching? Prabhupada asked. The priest then boasted that they were building another temple and installing Panchopasana, 5 deities recommended for worship by the impersonalist Shankar Acharya. Prabhupada was surprised. Your leader is Ramanuja, he said. He never recommended Panchopasana. For the 2 days in Tirupati, Prabhupada went 3 or 4 times daily to see the deity of Balaji. And whenever he went, the pujaris would clear the inner sanctum of all of the visitors and allow him a private darshan for as long as he liked, standing in the torchlight before the metaphysical, bejeweled form of Balaji. Bombay, April 29th. Although in a few days Prabhupada would be leaving for Rome, a problem now faced him and the management of his Indian projects. Tamal Krishna Goswami was requesting that Prabhupada allow him to go to America. After 4 years of management in India, he was eager to try a different kind of preaching. His god-brother friend, Vishnujan Swami, had pleased Prabhupada with his bus touring in America and had convinced Tamal Krishna that this was the most opportune preaching. Srila Prabhupada had accepted the proposal, although reluctantly. Certainly it would be good for the preaching in America, and it would be good for Tamal Krishna, but what about India? Once again, Prabhupada was faced with the fact that the only manager for ISKCON in India was himself. Carefully, he reviewed a recent report of the spending and accounts in Mayapur. Concerned that all money be handled very carefully and spent exactly for the purpose it was intended, he had written to Jayapataka Swami, quote, "Money for the land must be spent for land purchase. If I send money for constructing of a kitchen, it must be spent for that. Also, if you purchase land, it must be properly utilized. Ellipses. And if you actually produce some grains and vegetables, then where is the necessity for further money for maintenance? For maintenance, we require 100 rupees per head without any risk for purchasing lands and cultivating the same. I understand that there are only 20 men there at present, so at most 2,000 rupees is necessary for maintenance. I am not competent to understand everything concerning what you plan to do, but that is my rough estimate. You have tried to explain by long letter, which I have not gone through yet. In the meantime, go on the above principle. Money spent must be used for that purpose intended. That will keep it very clear." Unquote. From a previous letter from Srila Prabhupada, Bhavananda and Jayapataka had become a little despondent, thinking that they may have displeased their spiritual master, but Prabhupada reassured them, quote, "I know you are working hard and sincerely. I have no business to criticize, but as head of the institution or your spiritual master, it is my duty to find out your faults. Even Chaitanya Mahaprabhu presented himself as faulty before his spiritual master. To remain faulty before the spiritual master is a good qualification, so he is subjected to rectification. But if one thinks he is all perfect, then there is no scope for rectification. Don't be sorry when I find fault. That is my primary duty. Chanakya Pandit says, One must find fault with disciples and sons. It is good for them." Unquote. Prabhupada also scrutinized the finances in Vrindavan, where Guru Das was president and Tejas in Delhi was financial supervisor. Reviewing Tejas's latest request, Prabhupada wrote back, quote, "I am enclosing the list of checks requested by you by registered post. Except, I am not sending one check for 3,000 rupees for deity clothes to be paid to the tailor Lalit Prasad of Vrindavan. Deity paraphernalia is supposed to be collected separately by Guru Das and Jamuna, not come out of the construction fund as you have requested. Besides, I have advised Guru Das not to pay any tailor, but to make clothes by our own devotees for the deities." Unquote. Prabhupada also found a serious inconsistency in the accounting, which he pointed out to Tejas for correction. Quote, "According to my checkbook, after writing the last check for 17,600 rupees, there is a balance of only 18,745.81 rupees. But you are indicating a balance of 100,313.64 rupees. Where is the difference? Send me a complete statement of account." Unquote. Guru Das and Tejas had assured Prabhupada that the Krishna Balarama Mandir would be ready to open by July 1974. Prabhupada designed the invitation cards himself and asked that they be printed and sent to important persons. Quote, "The founder Acharya and the members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness requests the pleasure of Mr. and Mrs. Blank's company to visit the installation ceremony of the Krishna Balaram Temple from August 8th to 10th and accept prasadam. Guru Das Adhikari, local president, Surabhi Das Adhikari, secretary, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, founder Acharya." Unquote. With only 3 months left, Prabhupada's plans were to travel from May through July. Giving permission for transferring funds from Delhi to Vrindavan, he left. He would return in 3 months for the grand opening.